Hello and welcome back to everyone that's tuned in to the American Ultra Stock channel. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thanks to all of you guys that have been watching our videos today. We have the opportunity to have Tech in the house. Tech, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I mean, I've been meaning to come here for quite some time. We met back in 2023 in Austin, and it's been a while. Man, it's almost been a year since we were there. That's kind of crazy.
It is kind of crazy. Honestly, thank you so much for taking the time and having the patience to join us right here. Really appreciate it. And today we're bringing a video where it's one of the most talked about topics that I see, at least in terms of overhyping or even hyping players that we don't really know, the dual nationals. It's always a good topic. As we know, we have been relying on a few of them. Even in the senior team, and we have a few that are still to be completely switched and have taken the US as their main choice. So we have a tier list where we'll be rating them from S to D right there. S being a must, as in terms of 18 potential, 18 prospect that we should try to keep. So, Brayden, if you want to get us started on the 10th player, this is going to be on based on age as well. We'll go from the oldest one to the youngest, since they are still prospects after all. Wait, in 10th place, who do we have and where would you rank them?
Definitely. So the oldest player out of the 10 that we have here is a Mexican dual national, Brian Gutiérrez. He was recently snubbed, maybe you could say, from the Olympic roster. There was a lot of concerns as well with the Chicago Fire not releasing him to some of the camps, which played a role as well. But he has been in contact with Mexico, I've heard, and I think it's looking somewhat likely that he does switch. I think he's one of the highest priorities in terms of now recruiting him, because I think he's one of the closest to a switch. But in terms of overall, I don't think he's necessarily the most important. I think there's a lot others that are better, have more 18 potential. I think he'd be great for Mexico, but we know our player pool is a lot better. I'd probably put him in B. If it was another country, I'd put him in C, honestly. But since it's Mexico, our main rival, I'll bump him up a tier.
Tech, what do you think? Do you agree? Where do you see in terms of relevance of having Gutierrez for the USMNT?
Yeah, I think it's fair, everything Braden said. And it does matter also when we're evaluating each player in this video, it does matter what team we're fighting against, right? If it's a team that we never play, it's not a regional rival, obviously it has less of a relevancy unless the player is so good that we're like, man, they can play for us. Now, if it's one of those like Brian Gutierrez where we're not sure, he could maybe in the future play for the senior team. He might not. If we're being completely honest, it's probably more towards not, unless we go with a B team to a Gold Cup. If it's an A team, it doesn't really look like the type of player we're ever going to have. So I would put him on the C or B category. But here's the thing with Brian Gutierrez. I'm going to put him on the C. So I'll disagree with Braden on the B part, even though he kind of said C also, because I also don't think he will help Mexico either. I don't think he elevates Mexico. I don't think he would start for Mexico. Could he be maybe a roster piece at some point? Maybe. But if you look at their Liga MX prospects, they kind of seem to be at that level. And then they'll probably prioritize the guys that play in Mexico. And we also know Mexico loves to do predatory cap ties. So sometimes they'll just cap tie you and just leave you behind. I'm going to put Brian Gutierrez at the C. So essentially the same as Braden, but without the boost he gave him for the fact that it was Mexico.
Yeah, I see him as C for same reasons as you guys, really. And honestly, I could even see him being D, because I don't think he has the talent that we thought maybe he would have. So I'll put him in C as well. I think that just the fact that it's Mexico makes it a little bit more relevant, but in the grand scheme of things, I don't think he would ever contribute to either one of the national teams. Moving on to Jonathan Gómez, who a while back we looked at as what really important prospect, because, well, we didn't have anyone behind Jedi. Now we have all these players sort of coming up. Christopher Loon, Token perhaps could do well at the Olympics, got to move at some point. But Jonathan Gómez seems to be, there are some news around the possibility of him changing allegiance to Mexico. Braden, where would you grade him?
He's another one kind of like Gutierrez that I think is very close to potentially making a switch to Mexico. Although I think he does have strong ties to the US. He's been with our youth teams, especially the U20s, for a while now. It was unfortunate that he didn't get released to any of the pre-Olympic camps. Maybe he would have had a better chance at making that final roster. And I mean, we know the Olympics are such a big pull. They could have been a huge influence on his final decision. I just think due to the left back depth that we have in terms of all aspects, all levels, obviously we have Jedi. He's one of our best players at the senior level. And then you have the Olympic guys, Tolkien and Wiley. You have another dual national that we didn't include on this list, Nathaniel Brown, who plays for Frankfurt in Germany. You have some of the youth guys, like one that you'll see later on this list, as well as Peyton Miller for the Revs, who just made his debut. I think there's a lot of talent and depth in that pool, so I'm actually going to put him in D.
Tech, what do you think? It's kind of crazy to be even thinking about Joe Go being a D level tier list of a dual nat since he was so hyped for so long. What do you think?
He was hyped because I think 2 years ago he was coming up for Lou City in USL, but and then he went to Real Sociedad, went to their B team, but we never saw him in the past 2 years break through a relevant league. By what do I mean by relevant? Like a top 8 league in Europe, like the top. It doesn't have to be the top 5, but maybe an Eredivisie or even the Championship. It hasn't really done any of that. And if you look at it, put it in perspective, like Busio and Tessman, I didn't watch the Serie B games, just to be honest here, but apparently they killed it in the second division of Italy. And even so, we're not saying bring them to the A team. We're like, let's see how they do in the first division. So Jonathan Gómez is below that. He's a little bit younger than Brian Gutiérrez, and I would argue that even though we have options emerging at the left back position, we haven't really found that backup to Jedi or even a player that can challenge him. I don't think Jonathan Gómez will ever challenge Jedi, and he's probably a lower ceiling prospect at this point than you mentioned Christopher Lund. That's not really a prospect by any means, but he's still young. I think he's 23, probably 21. Okay, so he's very young. And then we also have Caleb Wiley. He's going to go to Chelsea and get loaned out to France. We'll see how Caleb does. That's also a prospect token. So I'm like torn in between for Jonathan Gómez between C and D, the Mexico effect and the fact that left back is still a bigger issue. I don't want to disagree with Braden every time, so I'll put him on D also, just because then it's just going to seem like I'm disagreeing with him all the time. But if you say C or D, I won't die on this hill. He's somewhere around that. Not too relevant right now, right?
Yeah, I would. This will be the first one we all agree on then, because I'm also going for D. I agree. I think that, again, grand scheme of things, I don't think he would even start for either one of the countries. Some links with him going to Chivas and going to Liga MX, I mean, kind of shows hasn't really done enough to earn a bigger move for the time being. So moving on to a player that will definitely be a little bit more important also because of the position he plays. He's the type of player that changes games, whether his level that he has shown so far proves that or not. In MLS, Diego Luna, and he was snubbed. I think we can say he was the biggest snub in the Olympics roster. Braden, where do you see him?
I think he was the only real snub, you can say. There's obviously a lot of players that deserved consideration, but in terms of official snubs for the Olympic roster, I think he was the only one that absolutely should have been there. He just brings something so unique to the team that we don't have at the Olympic pool, we don't have at the senior national team pool. He's such a different player in terms of the way he plays out on the wing and at the 10 position. If you look at our 10s, we're a little bit stacked there, but the wingers are very, very weak. And I think he brings a different kind of player to the pool. I would put him a lot higher. I think I'm going to put him in A just because, again, he's another one who's a Mexican dual national. I think he can really help them in the future. He's having a breakout season in MLS, one of the top assisters in the league and scoring a lot of goals as well. He seems to be close to a move to Europe, although who knows if he ends up switching to Mexico. We all know they love to bring their players to Liga MX, so hopefully that doesn't happen. I'm going to put him in A because I think he could really help Mexico, and I think he's actually one of the only ones, or one of the most open Mexican Americans to actually representing the USMNT. We've seen in the past, like Obed Vargas seemed to just be using us as opportunities because Mexico didn't really have the opportunities that we did. But I think Lunas truly has us as his first choice right now until persuaded differently. We just need to give him the opportunities. So I'll go for A.
I'm very curious to see where you rank Luna, Attack. What do you think?
So I'll just cut right to it. I rank him B right now. I do agree that he actually could help Mexico. I do agree with that. If they bring him in, would he start for them? Maybe, maybe not. He could fight for that spot. He's still a young player. But when it comes to the United States, it almost feels like we would cap tie him more to not let Mexico get better than ourselves. You look at the options in his position. He can play on the wing. That's for sure. He can play out wide, but mainly he's the 10. He'd be an attacking midfielder. Where when you look at the U.S., we have Gio Reyna and Tillman, which are pretty much his age, the same age. And then after Gio Reyna and Tillman, I wouldn't say these guys are ahead of him, but then he would start battling out. Like even Brendan Aronson can play that pressing 10, but I can also see a coach preferring not to play a 10 and then just going to a Johnny Musa McKennie midfield. That would be better than maybe playing Luna. So this is what I think of Luna. I think he's a very talented player. I think the player profile is there because we need more players like that in U.S. soccer. It's very different from the standard American player. And I like Luna, and he would definitely be a B roster player for the U.S. in Gold Cups that we've been playing B teams. But I just don't see him being a player for the A roster. That's from what I've seen with RSL. We've watched them a lot for youth teams. Talented player, I just don't see it. I'm not going to give him the Mexico boost. So for me, it'll be B. He's definitely ahead of Brian Gutiérrez, definitely ahead of Jonathan Gómez, but I'm going to place him at B.
Nice. Yeah, I think I'm really torn between A or B because I agree with you. He's a different type of player. We're not used to having these players in MLS, and it would be nice to have prospects like him coming up, guys that can be game changers, double-footed. He's just really fun to watch, but at the same time, I do struggle thinking about him and his skill set, the way that he plays right now, translating to the highest level in terms of contributing to an A team. I think he's behind even Paxton Harrison if he's to play as a false nine, which he both have done in the past. So I think I'll go with A, just because of the little Mexico boost. But honestly, if he chooses Mexico, I think for his career it will probably be detrimental because we know the way that they like to develop.
So because of the democratic process, I lost this one.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, Braden's doing the tier list, so it's kind of a dictatorship here. It's not really democratic. He puts wherever he wants, but
I mean, but we just voted it because we're 3, so we're always all we need is for 2 to agree that you guys. Okay, I see it. I'll see it.
I'm sorry, you were lobbied right here, Taki. We'll put him in A, but definitely can see why
I'll bring reinforcements next time. Don't worry.
Yeah. Oh, that would be interesting. Yeah, we'll have him in A, but honestly, if it could be B. I think we all agree he's not S tier at least, so we all agree on that one. Now, this one might be the first S tier. I'm curious to see. Luca Koleosho. Interesting to see how he's not one of the oldest, still right here, kind of halfway through the list. A player that has done a lot, not done a lot in terms of the pitch, but he has been in the big leagues and top 5 leagues. Obviously, his injury hindered his career and his development, but he is a player that even Canada seems to be back in the mix, which looked like he was set to represent them in the past. Do you think he's an S tier dual net, Braden?
I think he has to be our first S tier. He's more of a true winger than Gutiérrez or Luna. He's also younger than both of them, and he's by far better than both of them. I think it did come as a shock to see his emergence because he'd only made a couple appearances for Espanyol, a team that got relegated to the 2nd division. It looked like he was set to play for them there in the Segunda, which is where Jogo played last year. But then he made the move to Burnley, and despite getting injured around the midway point, I thought he was one of their only bright sparks, seemed to be so lively, creating chances, beating defenders one-on-one at the highest level in the Premier League. So I think he has to be S, and especially when you consider, I mean, we've talked about maybe these other guys strengthening Mexico. He could potentially strengthen Canada, who are right now at a better point than Mexico and seem to be our true rivals for the #1 spot in CONCACAF, despite their whole spying situation that came out recently. I think the fact that he could represent them, and it seemed like he was a lock to go to Italy. If he didn't get injured, I think he would have been considered for the Euro squad, at least put in the preliminary roster to show the interest in him. So I think he has to be S tier.
Yeah, on the Italy thing, I think it would have been kind of a predatory cap tie, to be honest. I don't even, honestly, I have Italian descent like many Brazilians that were born in southern Brazil. I don't really think that Luca has any ties with Italy other than the passport, like a lot of people that have the Italian passport. Yeah, what do you think, Tak? Do you think he's S tier as well?
Yeah, I think he's S tier for a couple reasons. I'm going to probably repeat a few that Braden said, but first and foremost, regardless of ties or not to Italy, he has been getting called into the Italian youth teams, and that on its own is a big accomplishment. I know they didn't qualify to past World Cups, but again, it's UEFA. It's much harder to qualify. If they were in CONCACAF, they wouldn't have missed the World Cup. Let's be honest. But if they were in any other confederation, they wouldn't have missed the World Cup. Let's put it that way. But for Luca Koleosho, a couple things. One, he was mainly developed in Spain. A lot of his teenage years and everything in Spain. And people like to hear this or not, they develop better players than us in the United States. That's not debatable. Second thing with Luca Koleosho is he played in the Premier League at age 18, and it's true, it's factual that he didn't stand out. That is true, but he never looked out of place. He looked fine. Like looked like he was part of it. Not really a good player, but if at age 18 you can at least look like you belong there, that's a major accomplishment. We see a lot of MLS players go to Europe at age 20, 21 and look completely out of place in weaker leagues than that. So that was big for me. So he's a very high ceiling player. Our winger depth is not that great as much as people want to. Some people believe it is. It's not. We have Pulisic, we have Weah, and then after that, it's like Haji, Brendan, Reina out of position. So it's not that great. Like for him to make it to our roster is not that complicated. If he's starting as a winger in the Premier League, which right now he's in the second division because they got relegated, but if he's starting the Premier League, he'll make our roster if he's looking competent there. He's definitely an S tier. I don't think he wants to play for Canada. I think it's mainly between the US and Italy. And it will come down to, is he good enough to play for Italy? Because I still think they have better players than us. So I'll put him on S tier, in my opinion.
All right, before I go on with my opinion, I want to ask you this, Tak. Do you predict, yes or no, that he will pick the US? What do you think is the likelihood? 1 through 10?
I think it's the US. I interviewed him before everyone even knew about his dual national, triple national. Like I found out that he had the Canadian passport during that interview when I interviewed him. I knew he had US. I think I knew of Italy because his dad had told me. But in the interview, I think he mentions Canada. I was like, really? I didn't even know about that. And based on my initial conversations with him, it felt like it was always the US. Of course, when you get called into Italy and if he can be a starter for them, maybe from a career standpoint, he might consider it. But I think if the opportunity is even, I think he leans more towards the US. After all, he's American.
Yeah, that's encouraging to hear. Honestly, I never got why. I get why, because it's Italy. It's a giant in the sport, but I hope that he does make the switch to the US at some point. For me, it's S tier, non-debatable, really. And I don't really care too much about the tie with Canada. I just think it's a player that immediately improves our pool. So that's the reasoning for me to put him in S, like you guys have said. Moving on to a guy that also plays in the wings. He seems to be now flirting with going to Bosnia. Esmir Bajraktarević, the Wi-Fi password last name right there. But where do you see him, Braden? Because when he played against France in the preparation for the Olympics, where we saw that game where it was streamed, he looked quite good. Didn't look out of place, but he missed out on the roster. Do you think that he's S tier by any chance in the long term? He's quite young, so what do you think?
I'm on the fence here between S and A. I don't think he's anywhere close to Koleosho, but I also think he's a lot more of a priority than Luna. So maybe in hindsight, we should move Luna down one and put Esmir in A just to balance it out. I think he's such a good player. We saw this when he made his USMNT debut. Yes, it was in Camp Cupcake against Slovenia, but he was one of the flashiest players out there. I think one of our best. On his first touch for the national team, he megged a defender and never looked back. He's such an exciting player to watch. Even with the Revs, he stood out in CONCACAF Champions Cup, which is, all things considered, not an easy environment to go to. I mean, they have all the prime CONCACAF things like the pitch conditions, the fans, the weather, everything involved in that. And he stood out for them. I think it's just a matter of getting a good move because the Revs are not in a good position right now. And Esmir seems to be one of their best players. I think he needs to move to Europe sooner rather than later. I think he will do that. And he's another one who seems to be very, very open to Bosnia. I think Bosnia would probably be his number one choice if you asked him right now. He's been very vocal in interviews about his ties and being proud to be Bosnian. And let's face it, they have such a weak pool right now. They had a bit of a golden generation in 2014 when they made the World Cup, but right now their pool's not that great. I think very soon he could become a player for their main national team and help them to maybe qualify for some tournaments because it's not looking like they're going to do that for a while. I think he's probably their number one priority and maybe he's not ours. So I think I'd put him in A ahead of Luna.
Interesting to see your opinion. Honestly, Braden's trying to recount the ballots right there and put Luna in B. So maybe he's agreeing.
I told you guys to put Luna in B. I told you guys. I told you.
Yeah, it's going to VAR right now. We'll see where he puts him. But moving on to Esmir, what do you think, Tak? Do you agree with Braden? Do you think he's A? Because I think he's shown a lot. He's the first one to be born in 2005 in this list too.
I think he's S. I put him at S. A couple of reasons for that. One, Braden kind of pointed out too. We actually have a legitimate shot on losing him to Bosnia. Bosnia wants him. He can't play for them. And I think he's probably good enough to play for them. So it's very realistic that we could lose him to Bosnia. And he does seem very proud to his Bosnian heritage. The thing with Esmir, too, is we saw that against it was Slovenia that we played or Slovakia? Slovenia that we played in Camp Cupcake. Yes, the opponent was crap. That's factual. But most of our team looked like crap that game. He came on and he looked flashy. He looked flair, the footwork, everything with it. It's a different player profile. It's not like a big player. It's just very technical. He's able to get you out, play with some flair, like a dance, like almost like South Americans play for the most part. I think it's a very different player profile. We talked about our winger depth not being that good. That was one of the reasons why Koleosho was S tier. And we haven't really seen how Esmir would look in a top 5 league. Maybe he wouldn't look good. Maybe he would look good. Would he look better with better players surrounding him? I think he's S tier. A lot to do with his player profile and ceiling, and the fact that we could realistically lose him. The team that is fighting us for him, the national team, needs him. So that's a big thing.
Yeah, I think I'll go with S because I think the only match that I can look, the highest level match he has played was the friendly against France in the U23s, where the stadium was packed. Let's be honest, MLS defenders aren't all that great. So in that match he comes on, we were losing 2-0. He was a part of the reason why we bounced back to 2-2 and didn't look out of place at all. And I like how direct he is, very incisive. He is what I think Cade Cowell thinks he is, really. He has the skill and the athleticism. Silky player. I like silky players in the wing. Very creative and is not afraid to take a player 1v1. So I'll put him there too because I think he would start for Bosnia tomorrow, if honestly.
He's far more technical than Cade Cowell. It's not even close in that sense. Yeah. Far more technical. Just one thing there. So Luna was relegated?
Yeah, I decided to relegate him after the VAR check.
I won already. Yeah, I got an away. And so I just proved to Greg Berhalter you can get wins away from home. So there you go.
That's true, yeah, and it was a quicker VAR check than the Argentina-Morocco match, so it's fine. There's no reason why we couldn't change later on too if we come to review something. Moving on to the player that I think it's quite funny he makes this list because he's the most British man alive, Englishman, proud Englishman, Noel Buck from the Revs. Braden, where do you see him in terms of relevance?
We talked about Esmir's pride to be Bosnian. I think Noel Buck has the same pride to be English, even though, is he really English? I don't know. I think he also has Welsh nationality, and I think that could be the path he takes just to say, oh yeah, I'm from the UK, just because I don't think he's going to be good enough for England. He is a player who I think a lot of people have rated very highly. Maybe some of that is the bias towards England. We know how good of a national team pool they have, and the fact that he's been with their youth teams along with some of the other names. I think he's played with Kobe Minu at the youth level, and we saw how good he has turned out to be. I think there's a little bit of bias there. He hasn't looked great with the Revs, one of the worst teams in MLS this season, and ultimately he's not able to start most games over some MLS lifers that I don't think anyone would ever consider even close to even a Gold Cup roster. And we saw players like Matt Miazga make that. So I think it just speaks to the level that Buck is at right now. He's still a young player at 2005. He could have played for us at the U20s. He has a lot of potential, sure, but I think ultimately I'm going to put him towards the C tier because I think the potential is there, but the reality of losing him to England isn't there. I think the only one we're really competing with is Wales. Would he choose that? Who knows? He's never been with them at youth level. I think he's been with us. So I just don't see the hype around him, really.
Well, you learn something every day because I didn't even know he had the Welsh passport. But I'm curious.
I didn't even know Wales was a country, man.
You called them England Junior, right? Do you think there is a chance that he picks them? Where do you see his terms of relevance?
I just missed one thing of what Braden said. Braden, which tier did you pick him for?
I'm going to put him in C.
Okay, I'm not trying to pick on you, Braden. I'm going to put him on D for a couple reasons. If we lose him to Wales, it's just this. The guy's picking Wales over us is I'm sorry. I mean, that's a national team that might not even play in the World Cup again. Well, with the expanded World Cup, maybe. So Wales, England. I'm sorry, but we're seeing players like Tomori, for example, that play For you to play for England and not be in the Premier League and playing well, it's very difficult because of their bias too. Like I'm pretty sure Tomori could play for England. You have to be like Harry Kane playing for Bayern, Jude Bellingham playing for Real Madrid. We even saw that bias with England. You guys might be too young for this. I'm old. I'm not that old, but back in the 2000s, Owen Hargreaves was playing for Bayern Munich, and he was a really good player. And if I'm not mistaken, there was already like a bias to not playing him. Like the national team wasn't getting the credit he deserved. Eventually, he moved to Manchester United and then had some injuries, but that bias has been there ever since I followed soccer. I don't think he'll ever play for England, just being completely honest. I mean, maybe they'll do a predatory cap tie. Probably not. Probably not. Like, look, Yunus Musa, like, they didn't give a crap. Yunus Musa is way better than Noel Buck, and I think the same age, by the way, and same position. And when you look at also the position he plays in the central midfield position, who do we got? Like, that's probably the only place on the field that I would say the U.S. Women's national team has some really good depth there, the midfield. Because you have Tyler Adams, Johnny, Musa, McKennie, Gio, Tillman can play there. Aronson can play there. And then when you look at other options that we even have, Luca Del Torre can play there. That's a guy that played in the top 5 league. Maloney's coming up. He can play there. And the prospects coming up too, like Busio and Tessman. Who knows? They just got promoted. So Noel Buck to me is a DT, not because of his level. I think he could be a good player. I think he could be a very good player. And he might even be a better player than Gutiérrez in the future, for sure. But I'm just saying, in terms of dual national, I'm not too concerned of losing. I'm putting him at the D tier.
I'll be honest, if there was an F tier, I'll put him there too. Not trying to hate on the guy, but honestly, I don't see a world where he makes either our national team or England. I mean, the England thing, he's probably, I have no idea. I mean, if you get called up, fair enough. You can say that you played for England in some sort of level, but I just don't see, and I know he's talented, but I don't see enough there to translate to the highest level. The Revs are horrible this year, but it's not like Esmir, a guy that stands out as someone who's a creative spark on that team. I'll put him in D just because there isn't an F1. So
what about Wales? We play for Wales?
Wales barely have any people, so maybe someday he could play for them. And honestly, he'd be actually, I think he fits there because Wales is just a bunch of English guys that didn't make the English national team. So maybe I think that's his most realistic path. Moving on to Diego Kochen, product of the famous La Masia at Barcelona, allegedly going to be playing for Atleti or be involved with the first team. It remains to be seen what he would do, but very high ceiling player. Braden, where do you see him?
The A tier is looking very open, but I'm going to put him in S just because I think the goalkeeper, when we talked about the lack of winger depth that we have, I think our goalkeeper pool is the most pressing need, and it's also one of the most important positions on the pitch anyway. I think when you have a talent like Kochen who's coming through La Masia, he's been on the Barcelona bench how many times last season? He was basically a first-team player for them, which, yeah, he wasn't getting any minutes, but it's still impressive for a player of that age and for an American to be making that kind of roster. Hopefully he plays for their second team this upcoming season or gets a loan. I think they mismanaged his minutes a little bit last season, but I think we've seen the interest that other national teams have on him. Every single time he posts on Instagram, all the Peruvians, which is his main other nationality, are in the comments begging him to come. And we've even seen interest from Spain's federation to have him at their youth level. I think that could also be a big part of why Barcelona haven't been releasing him for a lot of tournaments with the U.S. youth national team. I mean, we saw it at the U17 World Cup last year. We're now seeing it with the U20 CONCACAF Championship this summer. He hasn't gotten an opportunity, I think, to play with us at a major tournament yet, which is a little bit of a concern, in my opinion. I think even though there isn't necessarily the biggest risk of losing him, as you could see with maybe Koleosho or Esmir, I do think that he's the one that I would least want to lose, just because even the prospects coming up, we have Slonina, Schulte, Brady, players like that. I don't fully trust them yet. They haven't proved themselves on the highest level.
I'm curious to see where you rank him, Filippo. Will you agree with Braden? Kind of a big call right there to put him in S. We need a new goalkeeper. I think everybody knows that. Where do you see Kochen in this tier
I'll
list?
put him on S too, mainly because I don't think we can afford to lose any goalkeeper prospects at this point. We're literally starting Matt Turner right now, and I don't think he's good. And here's the issue. If you ask me, okay, so start someone else, like, no, actually, I would probably start Matt Turner still right now. Like, I can't think of someone there. Like, Matt Turner's not good, but is there anyone better than him right now? And I can't think of someone from the top of my head. But then we have some prospects coming up: Gabriel Sonina, Schulte, Brady, and we don't know, man. They haven't really proven anything. Kochen is 18. For a goalkeeper, that is super young. Goalkeepers don't really start to step up until they're 23, 24, 25. You can see a winger, a forward, a midfielder already play with the pros and do super well at age 18. For goalkeepers, U20 to play for pros, it's very uncommon. So he's super young. It'll be the equivalent as if he was like 14 for the field players. I'd rather us not lose him. I'll put him on the S tier just because our goalkeeping position is abysmal right now, which is a bit weird because that was one of the few things we used to be really good at when we sucked everywhere else.
Yeah, I agree. It has to be S because, well, we can't afford to lose any goalkeepers. Completely agree with you. So imagine this guy pans out to be a world-class goalkeeper, or even close to that, and we kept starting Turner and
We're
calling.
just not bad. Like, we'll take that right now. Just not bad.
Honestly, might as well. Exactly. So the bar is really low for the goalkeeping position. I have to put him in S. And honestly, I would put any goalkeeper, if there were any more in the list, in S tier. Moving on to Fidel Barajas, who I think is the first one in this list where, well, similar to Esmir, maybe more inclined to not picking us. Where do you see this one, Braden?
The last Mexican American on the list, there's been a lot of them, and I think he's the highest priority for me. Just because obviously Luna is a better player now, Gutiérrez is a better player now, maybe Jogo's even a better player now, but I think the potential is there with Barajas, and he is more of a true winger than a cam, which you see with Luna and Gutiérrez. And I think he's just been progressing at a super rapid rate. He went from being one of the standouts in USL with Charleston Battery, and as a player his age, I think he was 17 at the time. That's really impressive to do, even though it's not the highest of levels. He was standing out against grown men, made the move to MLS, and after half a season with RSL, he didn't even play too much, but he's already moving to Chivas. I think that's one of Mexico's biggest plays in terms of recruiting him. I have heard from some people that there is interest in the US of maybe bringing him. He was supposed to be at one of the U20 camps, I think, didn't get released. There's plans on calling him up to that level in the as well in the future. I think he's more open to the US than we believe. I mean, Tak, I think you'd know better than anyone because you've had the opportunity to interview him twice. But from what I've heard, at least watching those interviews as well, he seems to be very open to both sides. And I think he's just one that we don't want to lose because he can help Mexico in the future. And who knows? I mean, we know our winger pool. We've said it how many times in this video already? It's so weak. I think he has the potential, if he reaches it, to potentially be a USMNT option.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, what do you think, Tak? I mean, like Braden said, you interviewed him twice, and I think he's the highest ceiling Mexican American in this list.
Yeah, he was also going to go to a U.S. friendly camp in March. He was called in. I know the Mexican fans were calling me fake news for that, but he factually was called in. But at the time, if I'm not mistaken, Luna was going to an Olympic camp, and one of their midfielders that started, I think, was it Ruiz or something? One of them got injured, and they needed and even play those games for RSL. Even got 2 assists in a game, if I'm not mistaken. So he was going to go. He was accepting, which just proves the point that he is open. Could he be more towards like going more towards Mexico? Sure, maybe it's like 60-40, but he's definitely still open. Listen, if he had chosen Mexico, he would have just said Mexico right now. First, Mexico's worse than the US, the national team. It's worse. So why would he not just say, I'm with Mexico right now? If that's his choice. I don't think he is. I don't think he's made a decision. I would put him on A. I think he's above like Luna and everything, but he's not at the level of the other ones in terms of being proven yet. He moved to Chivas right now, which that kind of pushes him more towards Mexico a little bit. But I'll put him on A. I think he's an important player. He's skilled, left-footed winger. There's talent. There's something there. I'll put him on A.
Yeah, I'll agree. I'll put him in A as well because, again, good winger. We need depth in that position. He would definitely strengthen Mexico. I think he's the one more likely to strengthen them if he was to be called up with an easier path to their A team just based on raw talent. And I think moving to Chivas probably does make that tie a little bit more likely, but not in the level of the guys in S tier, definitely. So moving on right here to fullback, Christian McFarlane made the move to City Academy, a product of the NYCFC Academy. Very interesting player where some people haven't really heard of. What do you think, Braden?
Yeah, it remains to be seen if that move to Man City's academy will actually happen because it was agreed, but he's still with NYCFC. I think maybe it could be just a matter of him not turning 18 until next January. Maybe he'll make the move then. I think if he does end up making that move, he moves up the priority list because not only does it mean he's closer to his other nationality, England, it means he's in one of the best academies at one of the best clubs in the world. So I think for me, I'd put him in C right now just because although he has been a standout for England at the U17 level, I think he's been very good for them, especially in the U17 Euros that he was with, or maybe it was U19, I don't remember. But he's been good for them at that level. I just can't see him having the potential to represent them in the future. I will say left back is probably the only position right now that they do need someone at. Like, for example, Jedi Robinson, we know he's also has an English passport. I think he would definitely make their roster, probably the only American who has a chance to start for them. So in the future, they're going to need a new left back. I just don't see it with McFarlane yet. He hasn't played enough for NYCFC's first team. He's only played a couple of games, has been starting the last few, which is good to see. And I think he's been solid, doesn't look out of place. But realistically, for a top tier prospect, even at the age of 17, you don't want to just be not looking out of place in MLS. You want to be standing out in MLS. It's not the highest of levels. And especially we see how bad the defenders are. As a defender, the bar is very low there. So I'm going to put him in C for now, but I will say, unlike Noel Buck, I think he's been a lot better for England's youth national teams.
Yeah, difficult path if he's ever to make their A team. What do you think? I'm sorry, I was going to say Braden again. I'm so used to saying that. What do you think, Tech?
So this is a tricky one for me because I haven't watched him play. I've heard about him and I know about the English call-up or the interest in the Man City Academy, but I haven't watched him play. So I'm going to go with what Braden said, C. Mainly, the reason I'm agreeing with him is, one, I trust his judgment, but two, again, we talked about it. To make the English roster, you have to bare minimum be starting comfortably in the Premier League. So unless we think he can become that, and if you go back to American players, sure, Christian Pulisic could have started for a mid-table, but we saw how much he struggled to start for a good team. McKennie with Leeds. Tyler stood out for Leeds, but could he have started for another team? I don't know. It remains to be known. Brendan Aarons. And these are our best players, and they're struggling there. Anthony Robinson, he's starting there for Fulham. It's not easy to do that. So unless we think he can start in the Premier League and start for a good team, like a mid-table up, right? Not like a relegation team, there's no risk on losing him to England, so we can be patient. The only thing playing in his favor is we talked about our issues with the left back position in terms of depth. That's playing a role. But again, it could be one of those players where we're just talking about him simply because he's a dual national. Would we be talking about him if he had one passport, an American passport? Maybe not. No one would care. This is something that must be said. A lot of the players that are dual nationals, sometimes we just talk about them because they're dual nationals. A lot of them.
Yeah, it brings back to that initial point. Some of them are overhyped just because they have that other, and some people immediately assume that they're better players because they have that other passport. I agree. Honestly, I would even put him in D, perhaps, because I think it's a very difficult path to carve into the A team in England. If even the US team, based on where he is at now, it's probably going to take 3-4 years for him to get to that level. But you guys won. The democracy here is C. I'm completely fine with that as well. Brings us to our youngest player in this list, perhaps best for less, Máximo Carrizo. Where do you think he rates right here, Braden?
I think Carrizo is one of our highest potential true young guys. He's still 16, and obviously there's a lot of players that aren't on this list. So let us know in the comments, guys, since this is the last player of the video. If you want a part 2, potentially, we have so many other dual nationals to talk about. Let us know if you want to see something like that. But for Carrizo, I'm going to put him in A. I think if he was an older player with more proven ability at the top level, I might even put him in S. I rate his talent that highly. But since he's still 16, still playing in MLS Next Pro, could he make his NYCFC debut soon? I think he could. He was recently on the bench for them, signed a homegrown deal as soon as he turned 14. It just shows how highly they rate him. He's been with Argentina's youth national teams in the past. He seems to be a regular for both us and them at that level, which I think, again, just speaks to how highly he's rated by both federations. It's not a Kramaski situation where they're openly telling him to come choose us. They're actually interested, at least for now. It's still very early, but I think he's another type of player who is something we don't have in our pool. He's such a small player, but he's so creative. I think he's only like 5'3", but his ability on the ball makes up for it. And I think that says a lot because, I mean, we see so many short players' careers flame out because they just don't have the physicality, and the ability is maybe at the same level of some other pros, but the physicality ultimately wins out in the end. I think Carrizo there's risks there, obviously, in terms of the height that he has, and who knows, he could end up not panning out, but I think he's one of our highest potential youngsters that maybe isn't getting talked about as much as some of the other ones we have. So I'm going to put him an A.
All right, Tak, you had the opportunity to interview his father, correct?
Yeah.
And it was a really nice interview. I watched it a while back. It's actually how I found your channel when I came across it the first time. Really, really big prospect right here. What do you think?
Yeah, look, I rate Máximo very highly. The player profile is there. There's a lot of like South American mindset and development in this player. Good in tight spaces, good on the half turn, knows how to have vision, be creative. And we've seen him play against grown man in the Open Cup, and he looked good in the games he played. Even scored a crucial goal for New York City FC's MLS Next Pro side that was playing in the Open Cup. And he made the bench for New York City FC. They have an academy that, when you look back, they have sent Joe Scally to Europe, and that worked out. Gio Reyna was in their academy for some time. So they have a few players that have panned out. I'm very high on him. The only thing with it is, I'm not downplaying this, I just don't think he'll play for Argentina's senior team unless they do a predatory cap tie, because they have so many options. I don't know how that's going to pan out. Or maybe by the time he is good enough, maybe he's like 21, 22, and maybe he's already locked in with the U.S. because we're more likely to need him much earlier than that. His position, though, is very competitive with the U.S. That is a trick one. So I'm going to put him on A because of the position, because it's Argentina. I don't think it'll be that much of a fight. And because I haven't talked to Máximo, so I don't know. But just speaking to his dad, it was quite clear that if it's up to his dad, he plays for Argentina. That's not debatable. Like with his dad, if it's like you choose, it's Augusto Carrizo, he would say Argentina. Now, we haven't heard that from Máximo. He seems open to both. Also, kid grew up in the U.S., so he might feel the ties to the U.S. different from his dad. That is literally Argentine as it gets. So I'm going to put him on A. And the main issue here is if he's good enough for Argentina, I think he'll play for Argentina.
All right, interesting. Yeah, I completely agree with one of the points that you brought up. I think by the time where he's good enough for them, he would have been tied with the U.S. That's just how I think it's going to pan out. Hopefully, it's how it pans out.
We need him to make an impulsive decision. Let's say he's 19 and it's like, oh, Argentina's not calling me up. And it's like, and the U.S. is like, oh, I'm just going to go with the U.S. And then he's 22 and he's good enough. Honestly, and I know Yuri, we talked about this in the past and you didn't rate him too much, but he's doing much better now. Like Johnny, when we look at it maybe 3 years from now, because you look, Brazil's calling up João Gómez, like, for example, and starting him. And when you look at that, you're like, wait a second, maybe Johnny did have a shot here to make the roster. So could have Johnny have made an impulsive decision? I don't know. Milan inquired, Juve inquired, Thiago Motta was interested in Johnny. If he goes to a team like Juve and he's starting, could he have played for Brazil? Of course. So what we need is for Máximo to make an impulsive decision, and then whether or not he's good for Argentina, that's not our problem. He's stuck with us.
Yeah, honestly, I don't think Johnny even needs to move to those teams. Honestly, Betis, about the same level. I know it's a different league, but in terms of relevance and stature, kind of like Wolverhampton. João Gómez is starting, so that kind of speaks volumes.
We called up Maia in Brazil from São Paulo. André from Fluminense. If you're calling those guys, to think Johnny starting for Betis couldn't make the roster, he could have made the roster.
Yeah, and people were calling for Danilo, the one that was a Palmeiras product for Nottingham Forest. I mean, I've seen some people wanting him to start. So honestly, I think that we would definitely benefit from maybe some teenage impulsive decisions right there from Carrizo. I would put him in 8 as well, because I think when I watched him, I'll be honest, I only ever watched him in the Open Cup. But when I watched him, I think there is a player there that is just the ball control, really silky on the ball, scored a clutch moment as well. So a clutch goal at a good moment as well. So I'll put him in A. I think in the grand scheme of things, it's only an 8 because I don't think he will realistically be called up by Argentina. So that brings it to an end. Just want to thank you one more time, Tak, for being here. Thank you to all of the subscribers. And Tak, if you're always welcome here. If you ever want to come back, we really appreciate you.
I'll be back for sure. I mean, we know we've been talking for a while of me coming here, had stuff going on. I had to get all sorted out. Once I was set, I'm here. Having time, I'm always around. Don't worry, I'll be here.
No, thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here. Honestly, can't stress it enough how grateful we are, and grateful to the subscribers. Thanks to you guys, we've had these opportunities. So make sure to give a like, subscribe, and if by any chance you're a weird person and you know our channel but doesn't know his channel, make sure to subscribe. But I don't think anyone will have that situation.
You
But
never know. You never know.
exactly, you never know. So we'll, funnily enough, put the link in the description. Just feels so funny even saying that, but yeah, make sure to stay tuned in. We have some big content coming up about, and hopefully we have a big summer. The Olympics could be our silver lining. So make sure to tune in, and we'll see you next time.